hand if you want to speak. But what does collaborating effectively with farmers, whoever those sort of farming groups would be for you, what does that look like to you? Go on, Luke. Fastest finger first.
For me, it's about having their input, their say in the direction that things are going, solving. They're the ones who know what the real problems are. They understand those problems. They know the pain points better than we can do from not being in the field. So that for me, it's really about efficiency, making sure that we're targeting the right things with the highest impacts. And yeah,
brilliant. Good answer, Luke. Thank you, Rosemary.
I think for me, it's about making sure they're getting as much value out of the process as we are, and so that's a very even keel, and it's not just using them to help us, it's about it being very much for their benefit as well, and they're being heard and invested in the process. So it's about giving value to them.
Nice, yeah, good use of the word value there. Yeah. Amina?
So for me, and I forgot to mention, I guess why I'm here, because I'm aquaculture and I'm not necessarily agriculture, but I use lots of agricultural byproducts inside the feeds that I make for the fish and the shrimp, right? So for me, it has lots to do with circular economy, net zero, and also improving sustainability, right? So if farmers are looking to use their byproducts rather than getting rid of them, then that's what I'm here for. So looking at ways to kind of see how I can work with them, right, and how I can improve their the sustainability of their business.
Nice, yeah, good point in circularity. All part one system. Yeah, thank you. Sophie? Well, hang on, no. Sophie Payne and then Sophie Constant.
Yeah, it's going to cause you no end of problems. So if we're truly collaborating, then there should be basically ongoing contact and not being extractive. This was a point that was made to me by one of the social researchers at DEFRA, because DEFRA often asks farmers for feedback in surveys, and one of the criticisms that the DEFRA has, is that no one ever gets back to them, like asking for feedback, asking for contributions to a survey that's not collaborative, but they're still not getting anyone responding back. This is how people filled out this survey.
Yeah, really nice example there. Sophie?
I think in part it's about being a good person to work with, sort of just meeting them where they are and being respectful, verging on friendly, and just kind of being open to their needs, their agenda, and their sort of just day to day as a person might differ wildly from your own, and kind of allowing space for that and flexibility, while also kind of negotiating as well.
Yeah, you've encapsulated so many skills that are needed for those blossoming relationships. So yeah, we'll try and dive into some of those, like the negotiation, being okay with some conflict and difference. Conflict meant in the good sense of the word. But yeah, absolutely great responses, and there's some really good contributions there on the chat as well. So I'd urge you to go and look at those as I'm sharing my slides. So I'm going to share a little bit of content now. So there's a bit more like talking at you, but I again welcome any contributions. And Emmanuel can just interrupt me if everyone's too polite. And Emmanuel, obviously, come in when you would like to as well. So as we are working in academia, we like to put a little bit of theory behind things. But the concept of co-design, which we're particularly focusing on today, has quite a long history, a body of literature behind it about the approach. And people have been doing it for ages, like absolutely ages. So it's not really a new thing, although it sometimes gets hooked into new narratives and languages by some groups. But it really comes from these kind of broad group of approaches called participatory methodologies. So it's just an approach to doing research and working together that prioritises and amplifies the voices of underrepresented people and communities so they can take ownership of their situation and decisions that impact them. And there's a really global institutionalized approach in the form of farmer field schools that embodies that, and lots of different versions of that in different communities. But it's all about trying to, analyze who holds the power at what points and redistributing that power so that it's much more equitable and inclusive. So we get these diverse perspectives, ideas, and experiences to solve the problems facing people. So that's kind of like the theory behind it. And we see this enacted here, close to home in the UK with things like Innovative Farmers. And if you haven't heard of these guys, definitely go and check them out. They've been going for just over 10 years, charitably funded, and they've really punched above their weight in terms of impact. These small scale field labs, groups of farmers coming together with the support of a researcher, working on problems that farmers have identified, questions that they've designed, and the researcher helps them with that. So I'll go through some of these later maybe, but things from like looking at microbiologically testing raw milk to clover lays, intercropping with hops, as you see, the on-farm fermentation of sugar kelp seaweed, really different and diverse ideas. But this all demonstrates this kind of input, grounded knowledge, local knowledge in solving challenges that matter to people. A really nice source of stories and examples of this is also Cultivating Wisdom. It's hosted on the Land Workers Alliance page, but there's loads of stories there about ecological farming and agroecological farming and solving problems and innovating together. Agroecology is a really cool resource I urge you to go and have a look at as well. They kind of curate a lot of resources and research, but that kind of like translational and dissemination part is also quite important when it comes to working with different groups to what we used to. And I also flag up Pasture for Life because they do some great stuff that's very farmer-led and have really like embodied that kind of farmer-led movement when it comes to the benefits of pastured animals. That's just a little taster of what's that in reality. Some principles here. Could bore you with loads of papers, and these resources will be shared with you afterwards. But it's as researchers sharing that decision making, which you guys have all illustrated with your contributions just now, trying to bring in the voices, the experience, the knowledge at key points throughout, not just at the end, not just when it suits the academic or research calendar, because you also be conscious of suiting the farming calendar as well, which does require some letting go of the process. And there's definitely challenges with this. As researchers, we're very much on these kind of like academic cycles, particularly if you're teaching, funding timelines, deliverables, milestones, all of this stuff, which makes these approaches hard to implement in practice, but not impossible. And it's building that in to project design that makes it all the more easier. And funders now are getting much more used to seeing these kinds of approaches, which is good to see. So how do you kind of do it? I mean, in a sort of high level way, we talk about putting yourself in other people's shoes, essentially, which is a bit, kind of a personal, and we talk about these personal characteristics, these skills, that kind of way of empathizing, except you don't have all the answers. And I pick on the like microbiological testing of raw milk, for instance, because there's a vet, very much in the vet community, there's a sort of like, ooh, whenever you hear about raw milk because of the health risks. Food Standards Agency probably a similar reaction to it, but that has kind of hindered being able to develop ways that microbiological testing of raw milk could be a solution to farmers having more direct sales, having more control of their supply chain. So it's really like, trying to see things from the other side of the coin. Key skill with this is asking questions, which seemed really obvious. But when I do facilitation training, the key skill of a facilitator, that superpower, is the ability to ask good questions that just cause a flood of answers, really allow farmers to share their story, their ideas and experience without just being like a recipient of what you're going to do, what you want to achieve. And the thing I'm going to move on to here as well, which helps you practice this co-design, and this might be where I want to come in, is the use of gatekeepers to help you do this. Another secret weapon that we talk about. Emmanuel, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. I just wanted to echo like some of the key things that I've also seen from our discussions. So there is a talk on working with farmers and working for farmers, which basically you agree with me that the two words are sort of different. So with co-creation, what you're basically doing means that you are engaging with farmers as active partners, and these can be farmers, these can be communities, it can be co-developing research and making those decisions together to make sure that you have this inclusive and diverse perspective of various voices. And basically what you are doing is you are recognizing that the various farmers, the various actors that you are engaging with, they have or they hold this knowledge that maybe you as a scientist you might not have, or maybe you might have the knowledge in terms of the science bit but actually not having the experience on the ground. And working for farmers simply means conducting research on behalf of farmers. So basically, let's say, for example, if I'm looking at ahead of agroforestry systems, and I'm thinking of, oh, as a researcher, maybe this community needs macadamia trees so that they can be able to diversify. So I'm proposing that these farmers start practicing agroforestry systems where they have macadamia trees together with their annual crops. But is that particular tree really needed, or is it for the light type of farmers, and will it be having that value? And this is also something that I picked up through our discussion. So it's something that, is it variable to those farmers? Because you might bring in a solution as a researcher, but while bringing that solution, you are even bringing in more challenges to the farmers. So this is what I just wanted to echo, to say there is a difference between working with farmers, which is what we are advocating for, co-generation, co-creation of knowledge, and working for farmers, which is us saying, oh, I'm the researcher, I know what I'm doing, and then I'm helping you. So I just wanted to echo that. Thank you.
Amazing, brilliant, well said, Manuel. And to emphasize, working for farmers sometimes is appropriate, and I kind of think of like medical research as a bit of an example. It's kind of on behalf of society, isn't it? Coming up with medical solutions, for instance. But what we're focusing on really is that width. And gatekeepers, like I had a conversation with my PhD student, one of my PhD students yesterday, and she said, "Oh, I've contacted 25 farmers asking for some wastewater." And I was like, "When? How? What?" And she's like, "No one's replied." And I was like, yes. This is where the role of the gatekeeper really comes in, building those trusted relationships. And we've got a whole workshop in July, 17th of July, that's going to be a bit more about those practical ways you can engage the farming community, like who you need to talk to, how you need to talk, when, all those sort of things. But gatekeepers can be worth less weight in gold in doing so, but come with downsides. If I'm a gatekeeper to the people I've worked with, you'll just get those people I've worked with. So it's a bit of a, if you're talking about it in scientific terms, you can get a bit of a skewed sample. So there's lots of literature that describes using multiple gatekeepers, like chains of referral, to get into communities that you may be outside of. So this brings us into the, you talk about what co-design, how to do co-design, but it's the who of co-design that is really quite key, and what we're going to try to, develop a bit more in our activities today. So I've just got some pictures of people I've worked with in the past, but really it was quite a start to me in both these projects. One was about the wool, developing wool sector a bit more through positive welfare, and the other one was about antibiotic use in dairy farms. And there's always a tension between who's got the power in these communities and contexts, and that really can hold back farmers, researchers, the ability to do the project. And that needs some quite critical thinking about who those powerful influencing people or communities are before starting. Who's asking the questions? Who's setting those questions? Who's going to benefit? who's not going to benefit. So the winners and the losers, and having to think about that before launching into research projects is a really powerful tool. And who has the resources as well? We're probably just going to pose loads of questions to you in this whole session, because you might not always get to the right answers, but a fair criticism of these kind of more participatory co-design approaches is they take resource. They take more time, and that can equal money, but they take more people's effort, and that's not always well recompensated in some kind of value system in the long term. So that's another thing to think about. That's, again, Tom will talk about Adopt and Innovate UK and really recognise that, which is nice. So, oh yeah, I've come up with farmers again. Again, just look at their field labs. Really, these 10 grand you get for these field labs for, I think it's like a year. It's amazing what you can do. So don't think that heavy resource means, oh God, need loads and loads of money. I'm just going to share this little video quickly, which was an Innovate UK research starter. So DEFRA and Innovate UK money. It was a dairy farmer in Gloucestershire that was really interested in making her dairy farm circular, wanted to tackle the problems with slurry, the environmental and economic problems with slurry, and was looking at different ways of composting. So she approached us at RAU, Royal Agricultural University, and said, what can we do about it? Can you help me? And that's, great when that happens, when farmers come to us, but it's just a good example. It show you have lots of questions and critiques when you watch the video, but you can still do some good stuff with small amounts of money, farmer-led, don't have to be these fancy, robust in the eyes of some dominant scientific paradigms, but they can still be of value. Let it work. Cool.
We can't hear it, Lisa.
Oh, that is annoying.
I think when have you done the include sound thing where you click share?
Might not have done. Let's stop sharing and start sharing again. Correct, I hadn't. Let's go back. Stop it.
Slurry comes with a heavy environmental burden, including greenhouse gas emissions, local pollution, and negative impacts on soil health. Could composting animal wastes, like manure, help solve this problem? Traditional composts are usually aerobic and made from farm wastes like manure, straw, and other bedding materials. Alternatively, anaerobic composting using microbes, known as bokashi, ferments these waste materials, retaining nutrients and releasing them in bioavailable forms for plants. To investigate the potential benefits, traditional manure and bokashi composts were trialled on maize fields and in the lab. Bokashi composts proved practical and cost-effective to make and store in bunkers ready for application with normal farm equipment. Maize grew equally as well with bokashi as traditional manure. The raw ingredients greatly influenced bokashi compost mixtures, especially moisture content and carbon to nitrogen ratios. When bokashi was applied at pot rather than field scale, maize grew taller when bokashi was spread on top of soil rather than being mixed in, but unexpectedly, maize's chlorophyll content and root coverage was more without bokashi fertilizer. Composts like bokashi have potential for slow release of nutrients, but future studies are needed to measure the impacts on plants and land after application.
So yeah, that was just a little taster of that work that Debbie, the dairy farmer, she came up with. It's trialled on with her, questioning her challenges, and some of the biggest benefits she got from it, and this goes back to what Tom was saying with the Agri-Tech Centre, was the collaboration with researchers that could access all the literature and evidence that she wanted to know, that she didn't know how to get about the different types of composting, and some of that financial support and time to go and do that experimenting. So it's not necessarily like having an answer at the end of it, but being able to answer those questions. So just before we break, I'll try to distill down some top tips when co-designing projects, which is never easy. And I'll be keen to hear what some of your ideas are. You can put them in the chat before you leave. But ultimately, there's a kind of like temporalness to this, or timeliness to this, is seeking out the people that you've realised are going to have some influence or some impact from your work, and seeking them out early, and working with gatekeepers to really access those people if you don't have those links. And we've got some really cool gatekeepers on the call, actually. Listening to those impacted by your work. So silence is your best friend, asking those questions, and building, don't assume any kind of knowledge or understanding, particularly about what you do or how you work. Embrace the mess. This Research Starter is a really good example of, trying to keep diverse farmers on track, and lab people, and can be a messy process, but with careful planning and flexibility in that plan, you can do that. And expect conflicts or differences in what people want to get out of something, and ideally planning that in beforehand and acknowledging that. So on that note, if you've got any like burning top tips that you want to like drop into the chat, please do. We can come back to them, but I would really happy to give you but take a break now. I've got quite a funny little slide for that. Take a break, get out of your chair, it's killing you. So we'll come back in about 10 minutes, 10 past 2, and carry on with some discussion.
I will just put an example of a form that can be used to what Lisa was talking about. How do you identify the people who you can actually engage in your particular project? What type of interest do they have, and the level of support they need in the project, but also some of those strategies in obtaining support. Let's say, for example, how do you build support from gatekeepers, or how do you reduce obstacles as you're planning to do or co-create your project? So I'll just include a form in the chat, but as Lisa said, we will be able to share with you all the materials that we're going to.
Quiet reflection time, I guess, based on some of the contributions you guys have made, some of the content that we've introduced, and think about this question, which you can just have quiet thinking time. You can jot some stuff down at home if you like, and there's option to share it at the end if we have time, but there's no obligation to share this. How could you embed co-design in your work and approach your research differently? Might not be differently, might be right, definitely on the right track, but how could you embed co-design in your work? Some prompts there are trying to think about how you're framing the kind of problem or the issue that calls for research. Is there even one? From whose perspective? Who says that there is? What assumptions are behind your research questions and hypothesis? So this is really trying to think about it from an academic research perspective, trying to get you to embed those principles of who benefits, who doesn't, who understands. So if there's anyone who's just joined from the break, we're just having some quiet reflection time to think about those questions on the screen and try and bring in some of the content that you've heard already, apply it to your own situation. If anyone really, really feels enthusiastic about sharing their responses, they can put them in the chat. If you so wish, that's absolutely welcome, but no obligation to. Preemptive. Okay, so I'll give you sort of 10 seconds or so to sort of wrap up what you're thinking about. And obviously you can return to this, absolutely no problem. We quite like asking questions rather than posing solutions in this programme. And now I've got a series of sort of thought prompts before we go into our breakout groups, which I'm not asking you necessarily to vocalise any answers to at this moment, but it might help you think about your work and how you approach co-design slightly differently. And these really sort of help me, and I think Emmanuel can echo this, is when we were doing our early academic training and PhDs and stuff, these kind of bigger questions that changed our perspectives, I suppose. But what even is science? What do we think science is? What does shepherd down the road, arable farmer up country, what do they think science is? Where are the commonalities and differences? Context. Critically important factor often missing in many scientific studies. And the reason I put sort of KFC and Waitrose here, like food example for one, but the context surrounding people very much shapes their behaviours and actions, beliefs, ways they behave, what they are able and want to do. Many communities have great access to KFC, if you can call it great. Very little access to Waitrose. Other communities, vice versa, and that has repercussions for health practices and health outcomes. What does that mean for your work on co-designing? We are not robots. Coming from a lot of work around antimicrobial stewardship and behaviour change, there's a lot of studies that finish with this, a lot of policy recommendations that say this. If we just give more information, if we just improved education, that we just provided people with more awareness, they'll change their behaviours. But we're not complete rational robots. We don't have a lot of other things impacting our behaviours. So why might, say, farmers do find it difficult to adopt something or change something? What else might be playing on that? And those of you in social sciences, this is probably like maybe teaching granny suck eggs a little bit, but it's quite a nice illustration of we can all be looking at very similar problems, say climate crisis, food insecurity, but we will be bringing lots of different things to that way we're looking at it, from our backgrounds and our prior knowledge, and we'll all see and perceive and interact differently. So what does that mean for co-design? And I urge you, I don't want to give you homework as part of this training programme, but this is actually the paper at the bottom, The End of Naive Reductionism. It's particularly good if you're coming from the sort of more natural sciences, biological sciences, because it's saying actually this way of doing science on the left, reductionism, which really came to prominence in the sort of 16th, 17th centuries. My numbers are on the wrong way there, but around that sort of time, trying to break everything down to its functional parts to understand it. Wholly appropriate in some situations. But actually, even in biology and with the dawn of understanding genetics and genomics and et cetera, actually we're having to think much more about the interrelated factors and dynamics governing these systems. And that holds true in human geography and anthropology, and those sort of subjects have always come from this more interrelated kind of world. But how can we position our research to understand interrelationships and dynamics a bit better when we're maybe more used to reductionism? Where are they equally appropriate? And sometimes explaining it in these terms can be actually really helpful for farmers, maybe not talking about some of those terms, but thinking about systems. So over to you, Emmanuel. Do you want to explain what we're going to do next?
Yeah, there's actually an interesting chart
is there?
in the chat where Alexander is asking, for example, there is a huge volume of literature about historical and ecological farming landscapes, but this is rarely mobilized. And I find that really interesting, because if you look at the language barrier which is there, and in most of our agriculture systems, and trust me, I'm from Africa, and sometimes some of the terminologies that are used in agriculture, for one to be able to translate them to my local language is very difficult. And I think this is where co-creation comes into play, because if I'm a researcher and I'm wanting to conduct research with farmers in Scotland that practice crofting is an example of agroforestry. And then we're bringing in this sort of new knowledge that, okay, this is an agroforestry system, but we have not yet understood what they are already practicing. So I think what Alexander is suggesting is actually true. How do we break the barrier of language? And this is where I believe indigenous knowledge comes into play, and also co-creation comes into play, because if we do not include that indigenous knowledge, that farmer knowledge, then this is where we get it wrong. And this is why the above has been put in place as well, because it ties into that to say, what sort of power and interest do you have when you are thinking about your project? Because you will meet different individuals, example, gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers can be, for example, those that work with farmers. Let's say government institutions have their own gatekeepers. So in co-creation, in co-generation of knowledge, one needs to first of all understand how this particular grid works. If I could ask you guys to be able to just scan that so that you can see the whole presentation of how it is basically looking online.
Or there is a link in the chat if you prefer to
Easier.
access it on your the Padlet link. Scroll up a little bit. It's probably easier to do this on your computer than your phone.
Yeah.
It's basically an interactive whiteboard.
Yeah. And the main reason for this is mainly, first of all, to assess who has that influence and authority. So different actors will have different influences. And then how do you rate that? So you can have those individuals that have a higher power, so they're decision makers, and they have a higher interest. And these are what are termed as the key players in your particular project. So what that means is you basically require to have active engagement with them and also collaboration. So if you're, let's say, for example, interested in one of the projects which has been talked about, let's say regenerative agriculture. So key players of regenerative agriculture could be a farmer. If we're promoting that farmers need to start adopting regenerative agriculture practices, farmers need to be aware of the technologies that are being promoted, and are they interested? Do they have the power to say, if we don't adopt this, what will happen to our farming systems? So that's where that system comes into play. And then again, you have those that have the power but are not really interested in. So these are what are termed as, you need to keep them in your project, but they are not as important, but still more they have to be included. So these can significantly impact the project, but in most of the times are not actively engaged. So you need to identify those actors in your particular project. And then you have those actors that basically have low power but high interest. So basically, these can be, let's say, for example, maybe you're planning on, let's say, the hedgerows. So where do we put the hedgerows? And then there are local communities that maybe pass through a farm and they realize that maybe this particular farm needs to have a hedgerow somewhere. So those can be highly interested, but they have limited influence to, let's say, for example, convince that particular farmer to basically have the hedgerows. And then you have the low power and then the low interest. So basically this can be the crowd. So you need to show consideration, even if you see that, okay, maybe they're not interested, but still more their voice counts, because in co-creation, it's all about bringing in those marginalized voices, and then how can they influence, or what solution you are planning to generate with them, how can that be impactful on how can it facilitate the adoption of those technologies. And basically, I will give an example of where I've used the power analysis tool to basically refuse that. So I was invited to a conference in 2023 because I had done my research on climate suitability modeling for macadamia farmers in Malawi. And because macadamia is a highly lucrative crop globally, I was invited to a conference where I was given the chance to be a prenally. But the main question I had was, when I was doing my research, I engaged with a lot of industry people, but my emails kept on bouncing back, or they were so busy that they couldn't accommodate me. And then I talked with smallholder farmers who actually welcomed me into their farms. We had discussions on some of their thoughts on macadamia production, how climate, and how we can basically use climate suitability models to modify what is already existing. And then comes this huge conference, and I'm invited. And my first question was, are the smallholder farmers going to be in that particular conference? And the response was, well, we didn't invite any smallholder farmers. So I respectively rejected to say, I'm not going to come to that conference, because the research I conducted is the voices of the farmers, of the smallholder farmers. And if they're not represented in that particular conference, then it doesn't really have that particular impact that really needs to be out there. So this is one of those things that when you're thinking about the power analysis, you need to say, okay, I know that this might derail my academic career, my research career, but who holds that power? And also it's the same way how you can use that power to influence policy. And in 2024, there was actually another conference where smallholder farmers actually presented, and I was just there to listen. So it's a way of, you can see that I can see academic activism. We can call it that, to say we can be able to challenge some of these things. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about in terms of power analysis and interest metrics when we are thinking about co-creation and co-generation of knowledge.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emmanuel. Yeah, and I think maybe it could be, we'll just stay together as a group, because I think we have breakout groups that might distract from everyone benefiting. But if you click on that link, you can start contributing from your own work and situation, who you think those actors, those players, or what those actors and players might be. So Emmanuel's talked about smallholder farmers, talked about conference people, actually. It's a really good one, didn't think of that. Got hedgerows, I mentioned animals. Obviously there's the farmers, we can split that up into different types of farmers. Funders, different kinds of policy actors, And then once you start sort of mapping that out, it's just a little good exercise to think about before you like launch into doing co-design, because then you can target the sort of types of communications, how you engage, the priorities, the frequency, things like that. So if you're not used to Padlet, or you find it too stressful, don't worry, you can verbalize or put it in the chat. But generally you can, if you click on the little right-hand toolbar, there's a little like folded over piece of paper. Once you click that, you can just then click on anywhere on that grid and a post-it note appears and you can type in it. Don't worry if you move stuff around, we'll sort it out afterwards and share. All consumers, Patricia, yeah, good point. Or citizens, I mean, who even, like, we're all citizens, aren't we? And it gets all a bit meta and things like that. Oh, there's a question, does that differ from an ethics board? Good question. Then you could say this should be done by an ethics board. Maybe it is. Ethics boards seem to vary quite a lot, in my opinion, or experience. But yeah, I don't know, Bede, if you want to come in with that, feel free. Well, I can share. Let me share the screen actually, because then you can see what's going on.
Yeah, I was about to do that, but go on.
Oh yeah. Yes, you've got agricultural and urban growing communities. Yeah, work in very different worlds to the rural growing communities. Farming collectives, yeah, exactly. And farming collectives are kind of actors and gatekeepers all at the same time, and that sort of bringing in, like if those of you attended the launch event, we heard how actually other farmers helped bring other farmers into a project about bat surveying, and that's, you know, a great way, because that's the trusted route.
And also, Lisa, it's also about creating the safety, like farmers feel safe when they are talking to a fellow farmer, or even myself. Sometimes I'm like, maybe let me talk to this person because I know that we have created that safety net. And an example of that can also be farm works. So where farmers work together with researchers, academics, you're creating that safe space where farmers would be like, oh, they're not here to tell on me, because sometimes farmers are like, oh, maybe they're here to spy on me and then report that I have maybe TB on my farm. So it's about creating that safety to ensure that everybody actively participates in what you're intending to do.
Yeah, we've got some other really cool stuff coming up here. River trusts, the communities around farms, yeah, like the neighbours, the aligned industry, the services, university, NGOs, protected wildlife, food brands and retailers. Yeah, when we start thinking about power in the food supply chain, some of those actors in the supply chain can be quite hard to engage. That's really important. Trust, safe space. Works kind of all ends. Yeah. So the bottom left-hand corner is a little bit hard, because sometimes these are the like not that interested or impacted by the work, maybe not directly, have little influence on it. And quite often you see citizens get put into that, or say if you're working on, I don't know, trying to think of an example now. On all of them, I can think how they'd be useful to citizens. But say the composting study about trying to make that circularity on farm, make better use of the nutrients, and it indirectly benefits citizens because you're having less pollution, but they're kind of like, it's not directly benefit to that business or their, you know, daily life. And it's kind of a regulated area. So yeah, you can citizen groups lobby on some of these issues, but there's quite a distance there. But now we see more and more calls to get people who are outside of these environments involved. Like the Food and Farming Countryside Commission's done some great work about bringing in the citizen voice. Okay, I'm going to leave. You can carry on adding to this as you like. Oh, hang on. You stop sharing my screen. We will tidy it. Well, not tidy it. I'm not going to edit anything. I'll just move some of those things around and share it. But I'd like to move on to some kind of like funding landscape, basically. Pots of money, sources of money that can help bring these collaborations to life. And then I'll hand over to Tom, who's going to talk in a bit more depth about Adopt and the researcher role in that. So, hands up if this is familiar to you all. Any hands? 2 hands, 3 hands, 4 hands? Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll definitely share this link afterwards because this is a go-to place for farm and innovation funding, which Tom will talk about a little bit more. But overall, you can get funding for these kind of approaches from lots of different sources, but now we've got much more coming through central government, basically. There's been sort of like pockets of really cool examples with the Devolved Nations, Countryside Facilitation Fund, CAFRE in Northern Ireland, Farming Connect in Wales, really good at pulling that sort of government funding into farmer-led projects. The main ones have really been charitable and Horizon Europe, so the big like European funds, and they can be varied impacts depending on how they're delivered. So it's been quite a patchwork of funding, to be honest, for these kind of approaches. But now with Innovate UK and DEFRA funding, there's a lot more where researchers and farmers and industry actors can come together. So Tom, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to you to give us a bit of an example.
Will do. So how long have I got, Lisa?
You've got about 10 minutes and then you can have a Q&A.
Fine.
Yeah.
So I've got a little presentation. I'm actually going to whiz through it to just give a bit of a sense of like what Adopt's all about. And then I found actually what's been more useful presenting this is just open it up for questions, because I was furiously noting down, but like Amanda, obviously, really love to chat to you about FAI. And we have been speaking to you a bit. Holly, obviously, Izzy, Hartbury and Holly, really love to have a chat as well. Layla, like the silver pasture stuff, again, could be really relevant to this once I've taken it through. And I've noted down a few others. So the point is just listening to the stuff that most of you are working on. I think there's some potential here. Just quick before I put this up, so just a little bit more on the Farming Innovation Programme. This is the third strand of the Farming Innovation Programme. So previous to that, it's been a bit more focused on small, medium and large technology development. And that has been very much researcher focused. And part of the Farming Innovation Programme was trying to take those early stage technology and research developments and sort of maybe then work with farmers a bit on those. Whereas Adopt is very much about farmer-led, and that's what's made a big difference. Because that, I never know how to. I'm not even gonna. I'm just gonna share it like this rather than trying to get it on present mode. So
great.
So what is Adopt? Adopt stands for Accelerating Development Practices, Practices and Technologies. It is a specifically farmer-led program, and that's farmers, growers, and foresters across the UK, and it's really dedicated to doing trials and on-farm trials and demonstrations, very much of the ilk of innovative farmers. And Lisa mentioned innovative farmers before. They're involved in this project with us, and it's in a lot of ways it's DEFRA providing funding for the kind of field labs that the innovative farmers have been doing for over a decade, which is what's really nice about it. And anyone who's not been on innovative farmers, where they have incredibly detailed case studies of the stuff there, it's a really good place to go and get some inspiration for this kind of work. It's made up of 2 different grants. One is the facilitator support grant, and the other is the full project grants. The facilitator support grants are in there with the understanding that a lot of farmers, because this is farmer-led, may never have done anything in this world at all ever. So they've got no experience with grant funding or even projects. And so the idea is to offer a very easy to apply for application to match a farmer up with a project facilitator. And a project facilitator is essentially someone who's got project management experience and experience of doing on-farm projects and also grant funding. Match them up together, give them a stipend of £2,500 to then take like an idea that a farmer might have had. It might be a challenge they've identified or a solution they'd like to think about, and develop that into a full grant. And the full grants are, in the grand scheme of things, quite small. They're £50,000 to £100,000. But Lisa mentioned earlier, like, you don't need a huge amount of money to do these on-farm trials. And actually, what's nice about that is a £50,000 to £100,000 grant allows a group, because these are collaborative, like a group of farmers to do some on-farm trials and experimentations with the collaboration of researchers and technologists. We'll come on to that in a bit. Over a 2-year period, that's a really quite substantial on-farm trial, which previously was all being self-funded, all being charitably funded through things like innovative farmers. So and it also means that of the 20 million 2-year commitment from DEFRA, that's a lot of projects. That's a lot of farmers being able to collaborate with researchers like yourselves. Who's it for? It's for farmers, growers, and foresters. It has to be led by a farmer. So the lead applicant has to be a farmer, and that farmer, grower, or forester. And it's very broad, by the way. And that part of the reason for that was that to make sure that we were including everyone from horticulturalists, all the way through to more sort of livestock farmers and traditional sort of arable farmers. So it's as broad as we can possibly make it. Equine, unfortunately, is out, but flowers are in. So it's about as broad as they could make it. The lead farmer has to be English, also based in England. But the collaborative farmers, and that can be as many as you want in the project, can be from around the UK, and the other collaborators can also, UK businesses or researchers can be from the UK as well. They don't have to be in England. So it just needs to be one lead farmer in England. In terms of project eligibility, and by the way, I'll share this document afterwards. I think rather than going through that, I'll say the way that I've been explaining it is these projects, it's open innovation as well, essentially have to be demonstrating farmers doing projects that are going to improve profitability, sustainability, productivity on farm. And the outputs of those projects which are going to be made public, and we're going to do a lot of work to make sure we get that out there, are going to be of benefit to a substantial number of other English or UK farmers, growers, and foresters. So the idea is, they're open innovation. There doesn't need to be, there's no IP here. This isn't about demonstrating what, as you would with the other Innovate grants. Don't necessarily have to be demonstrating what IP you're going to be developing and what's the business model to launching that and how it's going to come back to you, broader UK PLC. This is how is it going to benefit the farmers that are working on it in terms of productivity, and how's it potentially the learnings from that going to benefit other farmers, foresters, and growers, which is really different to a lot of Innovate grants. And importantly, it's, for farmers, it's 80% match funded, which is, that's the highest match funding Innovate have ever done. Quick thing on the structure of those grants. So depending on your experience with this, with grant funding and projects, you might actually be eligible to be a project facilitator, but it doesn't feel like the role of this conversation that we're having here. So the facilitator support grants are quite simple, as you can see. I'll just make that a bit bigger so you can see it. But, for the full grants, you've got a lead farmer, you've got some other farmers, project facilitator, that's mandatory. And then where I think most of the people on this call will fit in is in this optional but preferred part, which is the research and technical partners. So that, that can be people, which it sounds like most people on this call, sort of university or research organizations, or it could be a technical business, or a tech company, etc., etc. So it's, my sense is most people on this call will probably fit into the full grant proposals. I'm working for the support hub. Again, much like the project facilitators, there's an understanding that this is very new. These kind of like DEFRA and Innovate supported grants have not been done before. It's new to the broad majority of the 116,000 UK farm businesses in the UK. And so there's a support hub that is free and fully funded. And the link is in this documentation, that yourselves, anyone who's looking at this, so from the farmers to researchers to technical companies, are able to contact for advice on everything from ideas all the way through to application. And there will be support there during in-flight as well. So anyone on this call that's interested in this, if you don't reach out to me directly, I really recommend reaching out to the support hub, and we can potentially also help with some matching of with other partners. I would say that we have a lot of inquiries coming in from researchers, etc., who are kind of asking for to be introduced to farmers. And of course, like it's a bit the other way around. And my advice, having sort of spoken to lots and lots of people at this stage now, is, you know, if you haven't already developed a network with farmers that are looking to do stuff, that should be your first port of call, to be going out there and developing those relationships early. And it's been mentioned a few times on this call, this idea of trust. And like, farmers are sold to the whole time. And like, you want to be starting at an early stage to be developing relationships with farmers where you're not trying to essentially get them to be the lead on a project you've come up for. And there's a lot to be said about where this balance is at between like your research aims and the farmer's kind of needs. But I would say starting those relationships as early as possible without having an ask, and that, you know, the project you want to get them involved in is the best possible thing to do. And so on that, Adopt, you know, is committed for 2 years. The full year of project of funding rounds has been announced. So there's 5 rounds have been announced and committed to. So the first one for the full grants is closing in about a week. So that's probably a bit soon. But there's another 4, and the second round is opening up as soon as the first round closes, and the same will be with the others. So, and there was conscious decision to not have one big funding round, because we want it to evolve as time goes on. We understand that particularly farming projects like this, they might want to start, you know, depending on if it's livestock or arable or what the objectives are, you might want to start at a different time of year. And, you know, as time goes on and more people hear about this, you know, multiple opportunities for people to get involved. So there's no necessary rush to get involved. You haven't missed out if you haven't got involved in the first round of funding. And I think, yeah, I'm going to stop there. I think I've sort of explained enough about that, and I'll open it up for any questions, or if anyone's got specific project stuff.
That was brilliant, Tom. And you distilled it so nicely, like the key bits, like it's like carrots for everyone. I did though notice, Alex, you had your hand up for ages. Do you still have? Sorry, I thought I'd come to you in the Q&A. I've gone.
Sorry, it was the other time you asked us to raise our hands if you have need of a funder in your work role. That's what. Sorry, I know it now. Thank you.
Oh, it wasn't for me.
No, you got off there, Tom. But there are some questions in the chat. So we got: does Adopt require university support? Could a researcher just collaborate with a farmer? That's from
absolutely. So you do not need to be affiliated with a university at all. So, you know, if you've been speaking, if you've been speaking with a farmer and you have a relationship with them, and you know, between you've talked about, you know, a real on-farm challenge that they've been facing, and you have, and from your research perspective, you've either got a, you know how you could set up a really interesting trial, you know, on-farm practical trial that would really work to help that, then that is exactly what this is looking for. No, it absolutely not. Just thinking, there's a lot of things have been made easier, and again, I'd recommend reaching out to Support Hub on the specifics. But in terms of, like, I think if you're a business, it helps to be UK registered. But for example, on the farmers, we've made it, there's a route in for them to do it as self-employed, as opposed to being registered UK business. Lots of farms aren't actually registered with a company's house.
Yeah, and I think Tracy's just bringing up some of the like finance bits there. Tracy, I don't know if you wanted to say your point.
Yeah, just that, you know, it is. I've sort of been on a lot of the Adopt webinars and with various organisations, and coming with my sort of grassroots hat on, there is a financial burden to the farmers. Yeah. It's not 100% funded. So, you know, just if you're coming from the point of view that, if you've just said, like, you know, for it to come from the farmer, as opposed to us trying to encourage sort of farmers to become involved in something that their business might not actually be, you know, secure enough to take on at the moment. So I just think it's, you know, looking at, with my gatekeeper hat on, which I always tend to have on, it's that sort of financial burden on them as well. And so it's looking from a business point of view, not just a sort of research point of view, I guess.
Oh yeah, I really appreciate you flagging that. And I think there's one of the things that we are looking at, and it's not kind of an official thing through the Adopt program, is there's obviously lots of philanthropic money out there, and I once we get through this first round, I would actually like to see maybe if we could get some of that to do some scholarship schemes, because quite a lot of people have mentioned that it may be 80% funded, but in the current climate, that 20% for a farmer is still potentially quite a lot. The other flip side to that, though, I'd say is because of a £50,000 to £100,000 grant, if it's done collaboratively, so there's, let's say, 4 farmers involved in that, that portion starts to really come down. And importantly, a lot of the changes have been made to adopt over the research starters, which for those that weren't aware is an earlier part of the farming innovation program. There's been some big changes made to how farmers can claim and how much they're paid for their time, and it's a lot fairer now. And I think it's worth pointing out, because it wasn't quite right for the research starters in terms of how much farmers were able to get paid for their time.
Just adding on that, actually, the kind of way to help it seem more palatable, I think, that the 80% funding is that as a researcher or the facilitator, they can take on some more of that the timely burden of tasks. And like Helen Browning said in our launch event, that actually she thinks it works well when there's more data collection is done by researchers than relying on the farmers. And that can be the time-consuming things, right, for trials. So if farmers were, make sure their costs are covered at the very least, but then there's a little bit of in-kind contribution, some of the labour costs us like a bit more equitably distributed, then I think that makes the fact that they're having, they're in-kind contributions for some of their time, but they're not too much.
Yeah, that sounded like a bit of an answer as well to Holly's question, and I think that's a really good one. The first thing I'll say is this is very different to anything Innovate and Deaf have done before, and I think one of the things I've tried to say, and everyone who's involved in this, is to be a bit hands up and say that, like, this is new and we're learning as we're going, both us in the support hub, Innovate and Defram. Obviously, the first round hasn't even closed yet, and I think we'll have a lot of learnings in terms of who's applied, what those applications like, how difficult they found those applications, and the idea is to iterate and improve on that. So in answering the kind of what should the role of like research organizations, etc. be, there's no hard and fast rule, and like the specifications and the eligibility criteria have purposely been kept quite open at this stage. But I would say I agree. I think what I'd like to see is farmers being able to do what they're good at, which is the farming. And as you sort of, I think, said in that comment, like researchers coming in and doing the things that they're really good at. And then the facilitator role, which has to be, I'll flip back on, but all projects, both the support grants and the full grants, have to have a facilitator. And that facilitator is there to be dedicated to do the things which some people really like. Project management, admin, like for those who have been involved in grant funded projects will be aware there's a lot of like timesheets, project monitoring meetings, and to having someone who can do all of that and free up the researchers and the farmers to focus on what they're really good at. So I think that's sort of an answer to that question.
Yeah, Holly, if you want to come in, feel free.
Yeah, I can do. I'm just aware of how much I'm sweating in this office. Yeah, I've just had some interesting conversations with farmers about this, not feeling very sure about, because they know that it's farmer-led, and being quite worried about kind of scoring and how much input they would need from a researcher. And I appreciate that it's new, but I think that's something that the farmers that I've spoken to have struggled a little bit with the role and how to differentiate the the name has escaped my head, the support person and the facilitator, how much to differentiate the role between them and the researcher and all of that kind of thing. So I think because it's so new, I think the farmers that I've spoken to have been a little bit overwhelmed by kind of the guidelines and the whole farmer-led, but also having other people play roles.
Yeah.
So and then I've only just spoken to some farmers who've asked about, well, could they get the grant and then try to top up some of that 20% with some sort of charity grants and things like that?
What you've said, by the way, has definitely been consistent feedback we've had over this first kind of few months of launching it, and it's really nice to hear it again. And I think from my perspective, that means I think we need to take all those learnings and stuff that you've said, and we probably need to do some new different guidance material that explains all of this a bit more clearly. Because, I mean, as Tracy said, we've done lots of webinars and stuff, and I think maybe we were still a bit too much in the research role with that, and questions have come up and stuff that you've just mentioned, Holly. And then and on the funding side, I've got a call later with the wider team, and I think I'm going to bring that up again about, even if it's not officially from us. That's really helpful.
Good points. And that's just kind of reminded me when I was doing my farmer action groups for my PhD, which was very participatory, trying to empower farmers to make the most of their situation when it comes to animal health. It started off from a point where they did not perceive themselves as experts. They did not perceive it to be farmer-led. I was there as a researcher / facilitator, pushing it along. But by the end of the 2 years they were in these projects, they were, questioning the vet. They were talking to other farmers about the different classes of antibiotics. I mean, they didn't even know what class of antibiotics were before, most of them. So there's a process of empowerment with these things, and there might be a lot of farmers who are new to going into adopt or innovative farmers, for instance, and but they hopefully with the facilitators' help, support hubs' help, learning from trialing and experimentation, they'll come out and be like, yeah, totally was farmer-led by the end. That'd be I don't know how you measure impact on, but that would be the sort of things you. Yeah.
Lisa and Pete. Oh, it's just quick, sorry, can I follow up on that? Was your point there that farmers are worried that they don't have enough of a researcher in there, or that they should be, basically they as the farmer should be doing most of the project, and they don't know if they should be doing 50% of the project or 80% of the project? Is that sort of?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think not knowing how much input when they hear farmer-led.
Yeah.
And not feeling that they know how much input, therefore, the researcher is kind of allowed to have within a farmer-led project.
Yeah, the irony. It's like, you're making it farmer-led, and then they're like, oh, does that mean I have to do everything and I'm only allowed 10% of the budget for a researcher? Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I don't have an answer, but it's really helpful feedback.
Power dynamics, right there in action. We've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to have to sort of wrap up with a little bit of funding discussion. But Tom, thank you so much for joining. Yes. I'm sure lots of people have other questions and comments, so we'll make sure everyone's connected. I've seen there's loads of connections happening in the chat, which is absolutely brilliant. So this chat basically stays open after the call, is how I understand it. But maybe if you would like to join some kind of, dare I say, a WhatsApp group, or some kind of way of staying in touch, maybe put yes if you're interested in how that could work in the chat, because I know emails can be like drowning in digital sometimes, and it will help with you sharing links, because some people put some brilliant links in the chat there as well. We'll try and collate all those and make sure they're in one place. We're curating a sort of repository, which we're probably going to host on Farm Pep, to be honest, but it might be just a sort of OneDrive thing, and we'll make sure that everyone has access to that, which is not actually that straightforward, but and all the sort of the agri-tech report, for instance, other papers, manuals, how to do things, videos, checklists. Oh, actually, there's a really cool checklist. I think I can share if I've got that. Oh yeah, if you click on that link, that takes you to a really cool and illustrated checklist about co-production. So there's loads of things we can share with you, which we will do in the days to come in. I wonder if I could just be cheeky to ask for one brave volunteer, to maybe summarise what their takeaway is from today's session. Who's going to be the brave one? Be short and sweet, doesn't have to be long. Go on, Alexander.
It's just been really useful for me, so this is really the first sort of venture into this area, just to have got from some of the other contributors some of their experiences of engaging farmers. and it's just been a really good, really useful afternoon for me to just get a sense of some of the challenges, dealing with expectations, funding, and some of the kind of nuts and bolts of it as well, actually. So, yeah, good. It's been really useful. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Alexander. And Izzy, you can have final words.
I would just say I don't know what you call the grid thing, the influence and then the interest, and then hopefully I can start a conversation with Tom and get talking about some research funding potentially. So thank you guys for everything today. Some really good way of this to spend the afternoon, just like Alexander said.
Amazing, thank you. That's really nice to hear. And like I just said, I'll share this with you as well. I've got so many things we want to share with you. But just to flag up, the next one of these in the online workshop series is on the 17th of July. So you can sign up via Eventbrite, again, very much like we did with this, Thursday afternoon. And that's going to be much more about ways to engage with farmers. So who to talk to, how to, and all those kind of things, which we started touching on. And we've got a deep dive residency, our first in our residency series, at the end of August, which is kind of invite only, which sounds really like exclusive. But if you're on the register of interest form and you've put your kind of particular interests and skills, we're trying to group people so that everyone will get an invitation to at least one, and also based on availability. I think that's everything. I would quite like to take a team photo, if that was all right. So if you're happy for that, and you can turn your cameras on. I've got to not stop sharing, don't I? That'd be wonderful. Oh, Emmanuel, how do I get everyone on the screen?
How do you what?
How do I get everyone on the screen? Because it's two. Maybe I'll take two. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, smile, and then I'll do it again. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Cool. Oh, Sophie, do you have a solution?
Yeah, if you go to the 3 dots. No, sorry, if you go to view, there's something called together mode, where it'll be everyone in the same room and we'll all look like we're sat in a theatre.
Oh yeah, you can have an actual. Oh, look at that. Okay, cool. Yay! Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated. And look at that, dead on 3 o'clock. So really happy to see you all. I hope you're part of this journey with us. And any questions, queries, comments, feedback, just get in touch with me and Emmanuel. We'd love to hear from you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Lisa, thank you.
All right, cheers, guys.
Thank you. Bye.